The first time I truly understood what peace meant, I wasn't sitting in silence or meditating under a tree. I was standing in my kitchen, early in the morning, staring at a cracked mug while the rest of the house slept. The world felt heavy on my shoulders that day. Bills, regrets, words I wished I'd said differently. And in that quiet moment, I remembered a simple teaching from Gautama Buddha that life itself carries suffering, but suffering does not have to carry us. For a long time, I thought happiness was something I'd reach one day, like a destination. I kept telling myself, when this gets better, when they change, when I have more. Only later did I realize how much of my life I had postponed. Buddha taught that the present moment is all we ever truly own, and yet I had been living everywhere except here. Each morning began the same back then. The hum of the refrigerator, the smell of old coffee, my mind already racing ahead to worries that hadn't happened yet. I smiled for others, but inside I was restless. Buddha's words about desire stayed with me, that craving is the root of suffering. I saw myself in that truth, wanting approval, wanting control, wanting life to bend instead of breathe. Slowly, I began to listen differently, not just to teachings, but to myself. When anger rose, I noticed it. When sadness lingered, I sat with it instead of pushing it away. Buddha never promised a life without pain. He offered a path to understanding it, and that changed everything. I learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, in acceptance, in letting go, in choosing compassion, especially for yourself. That cracked mug still sits in my kitchen. It reminds me that broken things can still be useful, and a restless heart can still learn to rest. There was a time when I believed strength meant never bending. I wore my exhaustion like a badge, kept my worries neatly folded behind polite smiles. I thought enduring everything in silence made me noble. But Buddha taught that ignoring suffering doesn't make it disappear. It only teaches it how to grow roots. I remember one afternoon in particular. Rain tapped softly against the windows, the kind of steady drizzle that makes the world feel slower. I had just come back from a long day, my body aching, my mind crowded with thoughts I didn't know how to quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the weight of it all pressed down on my chest. In that moment, another teaching came back to me, that holding on is often more painful than letting go. Letting go didn't happen all at once. It never does. It came in small decisions, choosing not to replay an argument that was already over, choosing not to measure my worth by someone else's expectations. Buddha spoke of the mind as a garden. Whatever we water will grow. I realized I had been watering resentment and fear for years. So I started differently. When negative thoughts arose, I didn't fight them. I watched them pass like clouds moving across the sky. Some days they moved quickly, other days they lingered, but they always moved. That alone brought relief. Compassion became my quiet rebellion, compassion for people who hurt me, not because they were right, but because carrying hatred only chained me to the pain. Compassion for myself, especially on days I fell back into old habits. Buddha taught that kindness is never wasted. I felt that truth settle into my bones. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Problems still came, loss still found its way to my door, but I no longer felt lost inside them. I was learning slowly, gently, that peace isn't found by escaping life, but by meeting it exactly as it is. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was about impermanence. I used to cling tightly to people, moments, and versions of myself that no longer existed. I feared change because I thought it meant loss. But Buddha taught that everything in life is temporary. Joy, pain, youth, sorrow, all of it passing through, never meant to stay forever. I felt this truth most clearly the day I cleaned out an old drawer. Inside were letters, photographs, and small keepsakes I had saved for years. As I touched each one, memories rose and faded just as quickly. Some made me smile, others left a quiet ache behind my ribs. For a moment, I wanted to hold on to them all, afraid that letting go would erase the love they represented. But impermanence isn't about forgetting, it's about honoring what was, without chaining yourself to it. I realized that resisting change had caused me more pain than the changes themselves. Buddhist teaching reminded me that suffering often comes not from loss, but from our refusal to accept loss. That understanding softened something inside me. I began to greet endings with gratitude instead of bitterness. Relationships that faded taught me lessons I still carry. Hard seasons shaped a resilience I didn't know I had. Even heartbreak, painful as it was, opened my heart wider to compassion. There was freedom in accepting that nothing is promised forever. Each morning became more precious, each conversation more intentional. Buddha said that awareness of impermanence makes life vivid, not bleak. I felt that truth deeply. When you stop assuming tomorrow is guaranteed, today becomes sacred. I learned to release the need to control outcomes, to love without possession, to experience without attachment. And in doing so, I found a peace that didn't depend on circumstances, only on understanding. As my understanding deepened, I began to notice how much of my pain was born from judgment, especially the harsh judgments I placed on myself. I replayed mistakes long after they had passed, using them as evidence that I wasn't enough. Buddha taught that the mind can be our greatest ally or our quietest enemy. I knew which one mine had been. I started paying attention to the way I spoke to myself in difficult moments. The tone was sharp, unforgiving. I would never speak to another human being the way I spoke to my own heart. That realization stopped me cold. Buddha's teaching on right thought echoed softly within me, that thoughts shape our reality. So I practiced gentleness, not perfection, gentleness. When I stumbled, I acknowledged it without punishment. When shame rose, I met it with curiosity instead of fear. This wasn't easy. Some habits had been rehearsed for years, but each time I chose kindness over criticism, something loosened its grip. Mindfulness became my anchor. I learned to return to my breath when emotions surged. Inhale, exhale. Nothing mystical, just presence. Buddha never asked us to escape life, only to see it clearly, and clarity brought calm. I noticed how my reactions began to change. Situations that once triggered anger now passed with less resistance. Silence no longer frightened me. Being alone felt like companionship rather than absence. I was learning to sit with myself without judgment. The world around me didn't transform overnight. People were still flawed, life was still unpredictable, but my inner landscape had shifted. I wasn't at war with my thoughts anymore. I was listening. Buddha taught that peace comes from within, not from rearranging the outside world. And for the first time, I understood what that meant, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. With time, I began to understand that true positivity isn't about forcing a smile or denying pain. It's about seeing clearly, without illusion, without resistance. Buddha taught that wisdom grows when we stop pretending life should be different than it is. That lesson met me one evening as the sun slipped low and the house filled with long shadows. I was sitting quietly, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and the soft ticking of a clock. Once, silence made me uncomfortable. It felt like something was missing. Now, it felt complete. I realized how often I had chased happiness like an object, something to acquire or defend. But happiness, like everything else, changes. Peace, I learned, comes from understanding that change. Gratitude became my practice. Not the loud kind announced on good days, but the quiet kind whispered during ordinary moments. Warm tea in my hands, a deep breath that came easily, the simple fact that I was still here, still learning. Buddha taught that contentment arises not from having more, but from wanting less. I also learned the power of intention. Each day, I tried to move with awareness, to speak with care, to listen fully, to act without harm. I failed sometimes, often even, but intention mattered. It shaped the direction of my steps, even when I stumbled. The more I practiced, the lighter my heart felt. Not because life stopped challenging me, but because I stopped fighting every challenge. Positivity, I discovered, isn't loud optimism. It's quiet resilience. It's choosing compassion when bitterness would be easier. It's trusting that clarity will come, even when answers don't. Buddha's teachings didn't remove my struggles. They transformed my relationship with them, and that made all the difference. As the days passed, I noticed something subtle but powerful. My relationships began to change. Not because others suddenly became kinder or more understanding, but because I did. Buddha taught that when we change the way we see the world we see changes. I was living proof of that truth. I listened more than I spoke. I paused before reacting. When conflict arose, I asked myself what pain might be speaking through the other person. This didn't make me weak, it made me free. I no longer needed to win every moment to feel whole. Compassion softened conversations that once felt sharp and defensive. Forgiveness became a quiet turning point, not the dramatic kind, announced with finality, but the internal release of a burden I had carried too long. Buddha taught that holding on to anger is like gripping a hot coal, expecting someone else to feel the burn. I was tired of being burned. There were people who never apologized, situations that never resolved neatly. I stopped waiting for closure from outside sources. I learned to create it within myself. That alone restored my sense of dignity. I also learned to forgive myself for the years I spent unaware, for the mistakes made out of fear rather than malice. Buddha taught that understanding dissolves blame. When I truly understood my own suffering, I could no longer punish myself for it. Life felt softer, even in its rough edges. I began to move through the world with less resistance and more grace. I wasn't numb, I was open. And openness, I learned, is not vulnerability without strength, it is strength. Peace wasn't something I reached, it was something I practiced, and with each passing day, that practice became a way of being. Eventually, I realized that the greatest lesson Buddha offered was not about retreating from the world, but about living fully within it. Enlightenment wasn't a distant peak meant for monks and sages. It was woven into ordinary moments, waiting to be noticed. I carried that understanding into my daily life, into conversations at the table, into moments of disappointment, into choices no one else would ever see. I stopped measuring my days by productivity or praise. I measured them by presence. Was I awake to this moment? Was I kind in it? Some days I forgot. I rushed. I reacted. I worried. And then I remembered. Awareness always begins again, right where you are. Buddha taught that every breath is a chance to return. That knowledge felt like mercy. I noticed how suffering lost its sharpness when I stopped resisting it. Pain still came, but it didn't define me. Joy still arrived, and I no longer clung to it in fear of losing it. Everything flowed, and I flowed with it. The world didn't become simpler, I became steadier. That was the difference. I began sharing this quiet wisdom with others, not through lectures, but through the way I lived, through patience, through listening, through choosing peace even when chaos felt justified. Buddha taught that we teach best by example. I saw how calm could ripple outward, touching lives without force. Looking back, I see how far I've come, not in distance, but in depth. I didn't escape suffering, I understood it, and understanding, I learned, is the doorway to freedom. Now, when I sit quietly in the early morning, listening to the hum of the refrigerator or the soft tapping of rain against the window, I feel a kind of stillness I never knew was possible. Not because life has become perfect, it hasn't, but because I have learned to meet it fully, with presence, patience, and compassion. Buddha's words didn't promise me a life without difficulty, they promised me understanding. And that understanding has been my guide, my anchor, and my quiet joy. I've learned that peace isn't found in running from what hurts, controlling what frightens us, or chasing fleeting happiness. Peace is cultivated in each mindful breath, each act of kindness, Each moment we choose awareness over reaction. It grows quietly, like a seed breaking through the soil, unseen at first, but unstoppable once it takes root. And here's the gentle truth I carry now. The world will always have challenges, people who disappoint, and pain that seems unbearable. But within each of us is a space untouched by circumstance, a place where understanding and compassion can bloom. That space is enough. That space is freedom. I leave you with this thought. If you could meet your struggles with patience, your failures with compassion, and your life with awareness, how would it feel to finally rest in the present moment? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and let others know that even in the hardest times, peace is possible, quietly, gently, one breath at a time.